Good morning, students. Today we are going to see the third chapter, that is movement towards a new world. The first we are going to see about the global trends between the two world wars, First World War and the Second World War. After the First World War, people became economically poor. The immediate governments in power, they were unsuccessful in improving the condition of the people. They were poor, they have lost everything, they were not having the work, and economically they were completely ruined. And that is why they lost trust in democracy, and dictatorship began in some countries, which became a driving force for the Second World War. So this was the condition between the two world wars. The First World War ended, and the period after the First World War ended, it was the period for the people where they were completely ruined economically, and hence certain reasons were responsible for the Second World War. Let us study the following series of events in this respect. First is fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, militarism in Japan, and global depression in 1929-32. So let us see the first point, that is fascism in Italy. When I am using the word fascism, it is a set of ideologies and practices. It is a political movement that embraces far right nationalism and the forceful suppression of any opposition. It's a one party rule. It is also known as autocracy. So, in the First World War, Italy was on the side of the winning nations and fought for those nations. It incurred a massive expenditure of $12 billion. It has lost lives of 6 lakh soldiers, yet the other winning nations took over the choicest territories, ignoring Italy. And Italy was angry and frustrated because it has always was on the side of winning nations. It has always fought for those nations. It has also incurred a massive expenditure of $12 billion, and not only expenditure but also lost the lives of 6 lakh soldiers. But after all these things, the winning nations, they took over the choicest territories and they ignored Italy. And because of this reason, Italy was angry and frustrated. Its nationalistic feeling was hurt, and Italians, they considered this particular event, and it was considered as a government responsible for this, and people were more than eager. It was more than eager than the government to avenge this national humiliation as soon as possible. And in order to this, salvage Italy from such a dire situation, to save Italy from a dire poor situation, Benito Mussolini, he launched the Fascist Party. He adopted a bundle of sticks and axe, that is a symbol of supremacy, which means absolute, right? He took the symbol of a stick, bundle of stick and axe. He adopted this particular symbol for his fascist party, and it was considered as the symbol of supremacy of the Roman emperors, as the symbol of his own party. Fascism evolved from the Italian word fascich, that means absolute control of the state on all things. And Mussolini, he was having the maxim. He gave one maxim to the people of one party, one leader. His party, that is Fascist Party, and he was the leader. Benito Mussolini was the leader. So one party, one leader was the maxim. He gave military training to his party volunteers, and they were wearing black color uniform. And after coming to power, Mussolini captured the various provinces like Rhodes and Dodecanesa islands from Turkey. He also won Albania, Abyssinia, and Fiume Port in 1924, and this was the after these victories, Mussolini, he snapped all ties with League of Nations. Now Italy was no more the member of League of Nations, and he joined the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis. And this is how Italy became responsible for the Second World War. Benito Mussolini, he established his own party, that is Fascist Party. It was a supremacy of the Roman emperor, and he has taken this word from the Italian word fascist, that means absolute control of the state on all things, and his maxim was one party, one leader. Next event is Nazism in Germany. Germany had lost the First World War. We have seen in the previous chapter how Germany was held responsible for the First World War, and it was forced to pay the war fine, right? It was compelled to sign the Treaty of Versailles, and because of this reason, Germans, they were extremely angry with unjust treaty. And Adolf Hitler, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1919, and this party later on it came to be known as Nazi Party. The Nazi philosophy, it included nationalism and socialism, right? And after the death of German President Hindenburg, Adolf Hitler assumed the post. He became the president, right? He became the president, and he established his own dictatorial rule because he was a dictator, one man rule, and he adopted stern, strict, and aggressive policies, led the Germans towards narrow nationalism, loving their own country but having hate for the others. Germans considered Hitler as a Führer, is a leader, savior, right? He has come to save Germany. So that kind of feeling was spread over the Germany. Nazi soldiers, they wore blue military uniform, and they stuck a red strip on their shoulder, and they wore a symbol of swastika. So Hitler's authoritarian and militarist nature became obvious after coming to power. Before coming to power, he was considered as Führer, a leader, but then after, as soon as he took the post, he assumed the post as a president, he started showing his authoritarian and militarist nature, and it was obvious, it was clearly seen after coming to power. His main aim was the emergence of Germany as a major power. He wanted to see Germany as a major power, right, in the whole world, and one step he had taken for this in the name of purification of the German race. German race should be purely German, and that is why he started purification, and in this policies he targeted to exterminating Jews, gypsies, and mentally challenged people. Here he started thinking negativity for the people who were coming from different places. They were not original Germans, and the people who were mentally challenged, right? Mentally ill, mentally sick people. This kind of people were the target of Hitler. By the end of the Second World War, innumerable European Jews lost lives, and this particular event is known as the Holocaust, a genocide. When I am saying Holocaust or a genocide, it is that the people in a group, right? Many things are destroyed, many people they are killed because of war or a fight, and that is known as Holocaust. And here Hitler, he killed so many people. Hitler's expansionism, military action against neighboring countries, and the policy of exterminating certain groups led to the Second World War, and it became important reason for the same. Let us see the third event, that is militarism in Japan. Militarism, that means strong military capability or giving importance to military power. According to the Treaty of Versailles, Japan got the benefit of the provinces of China. England and France, they distributed many regions of Germany between them because they were the superpowers in those days. Japan was not pleased with this. It was not satisfied because it has got only the benefit of having certain provinces of China. In 1921-22, Washington met, Japan had to agree to have only 35% of the English and American naval force. American naval force was distributed among the certain nations. Among this, Japan only got 35% of the naval force. Japan also had to vacate the islands of Sakhalin and Siberia, and Japanese youth was angry at this. Specifically, the young citizen of Japan, they were angry on this particular step. During this time, as the youth was angry in the nation, and this particular time only there were elections in Japan, and the parties supporting militarism, they got the majority because majority of the youth, they wanted to give their vote to the militarism because they wanted to make Japan military capable, strong, importance to military power. And that is why the military nationalism of Japan adopted the policy of expansionism. Japan did not get a permanent place in the League of Nations because of those activity of expansionism, activity of giving importance to militarism. The Western countries could not stop the imperialist activities of Japan, capturing the territories, and that capturing territories of Japan was not accepted by the Western countries. Japan captured Manchuria and established Manchukuo government in 1932, and it also captured Korea, Mongolia, Shantung and some provinces of China, and it improved its relation with Germany and Italy and let loose its string of imperialism after Emperor Meiji. Emperor Hirohito also encouraged these activities of Japan. Which activities of Japan? Capturing the territories, right? So this particular activities of Japan was encouraged even by the emperors. Thus, Japan snapped all its ties with the League of Nations in 1933. So now Japan is no longer the member of League of Nations. Let us have a look the most important event in those days, that is called Global Depression 1929-32. When we say the word global depression, depression is defined as a severe and prolonged recession. When we are using the word recession, it means a situation of declining economic activity. Economic activity of people, the most probably the major activity is employment. People, they were not having employment with them, hence their economic activity was declining day by day, and hence the nation's economic activity was also declining. So if an economy continues to suffer recession for 2 or more quarters, it is called depression. So here we are going to see about the global depression in the years 1929 to 32. The heads of the most of European nations, they have the belief like after the end of the First World War, even the post-war problems of the world will come to an end. So the problems after the war, the destruction of man and material, there was a destruction of economic activities, there was social change, there were long-term effects in that people were not having the food, they were facing the scarcity of food, they were facing the scarcity of various things which were needed. So these were the things we can say that these things were considered as the post-war problems of the world, but this proved wrong. Suddenly, a large number of shares began to sold in the Wall Street stock market, causing the stock market to crumble. It happened that Wall Street, that is the name of the stock market of USA, and it happened that so many shares, thousands, thousands of shares, they were sold at a time, and that brought the declination of stock market. It crumbled down, and this was called the Wall Street crisis by the critics. It was on 24th October 1929, and this particular share crisis shook the whole world because the trade of shares was shattered. It shattered the economic conditions of the nations because thousands of shares were sold, and it weakens the economic policy of the nation. It gave birth to the Great Global Depression. Most of the nations of the world were affected by this. Even the superpower like Great Britain had to sacrifice its policy of keeping gold reserve against its currency pound. Earlier, whenever there was a trade between the countries, the gold was accepted as a currency in the exchange of pound. But now, because of the global depression, the policy of keeping gold against the currency pound, that was sacrificed, it was stopped, and this affected other nations of the world and international trade and industries also, because gold was not accepted and the currency pound was only accepted, and that has a very big effect on the other nations' international trades and industries. Prosperous nations like America also had to impose strict measures. Global trade was reduced to half. There was no international trade and industry, no import and export business because of the global depression, because of the global sacrifice, because of the policy of keeping gold reserve against the pound. And this is all we can consider it as an outline for the Second World War. Let us have a look at the World War from 1939 to 1949. The factors. The seat for World War II had been sown in the Treaty of Versailles. Paris Peace process has displeased many nations. The events happened after that lead to the World War II. So dear children, let us study the factors responsible for World War II. First of all, causes of World War II. The first cause is fierce nationalism. Fierce is intense, extreme. After the First World War, fierce nationalism developed in Germany, extreme nationalism, Japan and Italy. So these were the three countries we can say there was a fierce nationalism. Germans could never forget and overcome the Treaty of Versailles, the insult they had during the Treaty of Versailles. They were considered as responsible for the First World War. Consequently, Hitler recaptured some provinces of Austria and Czechoslovakia, following his Nazi philosophy that Germans must get all those provinces where Germans were staying. That means the places where Germans are living, that particular place belong to Germany. Italy could not forget that it was ignored in the Treaty of Versailles. Under the leadership of the Fascist Party, Mussolini started his fierce nationalism and adopted imperialist policies. On the other hand, Japan too. Treaty of Versailles. Consequently, Hitler captured some provinces of Austria and Czechoslovakia, and following his Nazi philosophy that I said, that Germans they must get all those provinces where they were staying. Italy could not forget that it was ignored in the Treaty of Versailles. Under the leadership of the Fascist Party, Mussolini started this fierce nationalism and adopted imperialist policies. Imperialist policies again capturing the territories or the people. On the other hand, Japan too gave in to imperialism, thus world peace was in danger. Both the countries, they wanted to capture the provinces, the regions which were weak, which were poor, and they wanted to expand their own kingdom, and hence this was fierce nationalism. Let us see the second, that is groupism. Since France was always afraid of Germany after the First World War, it entered into a treaty with Belgium, Poland, Romania and Czechoslovakia. These are the name of the countries which all together entered into a treaty. Italy signed treaty with Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, Greece, Turkey and Austria. So this is the group, right? This is the group of Italy, we can see. Then comes Russia. It signed treaty with Germany, Turkey, Lithuania and Iran. So this is the group of Russia. Then comes Italy again, formed the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo, and it was known as Axis group, and it has the support of Germany and Japan. Both the nations, they were having fierce nationalism, they were following the imperialistic policies in which they wanted to capture the territory. Then comes England and France formed another group with democratic values. Germany signed a non-aggression treaty with Russia. So this is how we can see the whole atmosphere of the global fear spread in the whole world. This factor too gave an impetus to the World War. It was considered as a responsible factor because it has given the growth in the fear, spreading of fear in the whole world. Let us see the third, that is militarism. One side, efforts were being made to maintain peace after the First World War, and on the other side, the European nations, they were having the competition for ammunition, making of weapons, making of arms. The production of more and more weapons increased in all European nations. War weapons better than the others were being manufactured. So it was a competition. My weapon is better than you. Right? Some nations like Russia and Germany, compulsory military training was imposed on the citizens. All nations began inducing more men into Navy, Air Force and Army. So the defense forces were full of people, citizens, particularly male citizens. In the East, Japan increased its military force, and finally the World War II had been declared. Even England and France tried to equip themselves with war weapons because all other countries, they were into the competition of making weapons and arms. So England and France also tried to equip themselves with the war weapons to have defense against the other nations. Next is the failure of the League of Nations. We have seen till now the nation's own policies, that is fierce nationalism, that is again nations policy, groupism, again nations they decided their groups. Then we have seen about militarism, again nations they have decided for the betterment of their nations. But this is the reason completely different from the other reasons because it is the failure of the League of Nations. In order to establish peace after the First World War, the League of Nations was formed, but neither could it become a supreme organization having sovereignty, the power in its hand over other nations of the world, nor did it have its own army to make the nations follow its principle, right? So, the League of Nations was not having any power, they were not having its own army, so it was not possible for them to control the member nations. Member nations were not obliged to take the problems to the League of Nations or to accept the judgment passed by it. They were not ready to listen to the League of Nations, and so many nations moved out of the League of Nations. Initially, it is said that Russia and Germany, they snapped their ties against League of Nations. But then, certain other countries like Italy and Japan, it also moved out because Italy had captured Abyssinia, Japan attacked Manchuria, and Germany had snatched away some provinces of Czechoslovakia. So because of this reason, we can say that Russia, Germany, Italy, Japan, right, these all particular countries, they moved out of the League of Nations because of their expansionism. Still, the League of Nations could do nothing. The greed for power among several nations, it became stronger in the League of Nations, and then League of Nations was not able to stop the groupism, and it is considered as the biggest failure of the League of Nations. Then comes the Treaty of Versailles. This particular treaty formed in the Paris peace process at the end of the First World War. We have seen in our previous chapter, Mirror Palace and the village called Versailles, the treaty was formed. Since Germany it was found responsible for the war, it has to pay the fine, the war fine. And how much? 6.5 billion pounds was paid as a war fine because Germany was held responsible. Certain provinces was taken away, for example, Ruhr. It was taken away from Germany. Its Rhine River, it was opened for international sea route against the wish of Germany, and because of unfair and humiliating treaty forcibly imposed on Germany, the German dictator Adolf Hitler called the Treaty of Versailles as just a piece of paper, not a document, not an important paper, but it is just a piece of paper, and he announced to reject it. Right? So this is the Treaty of Versailles. Let us see the imperialistic ambition of Adolf Hitler. Hitler laid the foundation of the Second World War. When I am saying imperialistic ambition, that is direct territorial acquisition, political dominance over other nations, and that was the ambition of Adolf Hitler. He laid the foundation of the Second World War. He had a fierce nationalist and militarist nature, as we have seen in the earlier paragraph, and that is why he wished the unity, stability, prosperity of Germany at any cost, because he was having fierce nationalism, love for his own country, and hatred for the other's country. The first victim of his imperialism was Austria. Austrian territory was captured by Adolf Hitler. Along with German army, he entered Austria on 12 March 1938. And on the very next day of the Munich Convention, Germany captured Czechoslovakia. That was 1st October 1938. After that, it captured the Menard port of Lithuania in March 1939. Thus, the French-German nation was created by Hitler because he started capturing the territories. His imperialistic policy was the main cause of the Second World War. Next is German attack on Poland, an immediate cause. This particular event is considered as an immediate cause. The above mentioned causes made the whole world to sit on the heap of ammunition, that is arms and weapons. Only a small spark was enough to blow up the whole world, because each and every nation has its own weapons and arms, and this spark was given by German attack on the peaceful Poland on September 1st, 1939 early morning. So we can see that Germany captured Czechoslovakia in 1938, then Lithuania's 1939, and then we can consider that in 1939, the September, March, it captured Lithuania, and in September, early morning, Poland was attacked. The World War began. Britain and France warned Germany to stop the war immediately, but Germany ignored the warning, and hence later on Britain and France also plunged into this war, and consequently the war spread into the entire world. Have a look at the World War II and outline. With the commencement of the World War II, the world was divided into two groups. On one side was a group of allied nations, and the other side there was Axis nations. In allied nations, it was led by England and France, and Axis nations, they were having Germany, Italy, and Japan. Some other factors, there were war-driven mentality and built into this. Japan attacked American Navy at Pearl Harbor, and because of this, America gave up its neutral stand. Till now, America's name we have not heard anywhere because America was having its own neutral stand. It was not on the any side of any nations. But now, as its navy with Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan, America gave up its neutral stand and it retaliated. It attacked in Britain. It joined the Allied nations, that is the group led by England and France, making it stronger. The war was going on in full swing, and in that particular days, America dropped atom bombs on the two Japanese cities, namely Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we all know about this event. We have studied in our lower classes also. In order to stop Japan from moving any further, 1,34,000 Japanese citizens lost their lives and there was absolute destruction. Japan surrendered on 11th August 1945, and it is considered as the end of the World War II. Next is the effects of World War II, and these are the immediate effects. The first is economic effect. This war had caused horrendous destruction in the world, massive destruction. All the involved nations had incurred huge expenses. America spent $350 billion, and other nations also spent more than $1,000 billion after the war. Property worth the same value had been destroyed in the World War II. England lost its property worth 2,000 crore, and about Germany, we can't imagine how much loss they bear. The nations of the world, they gave more importance to the productions of arms and ammunition because those were the days of war, those were the days of competition of making weapons, so there was a scarcity of things for basic needs. Production reduced, companies and factories and industries were not working, inflation, the price rise increased, people were struggling for livelihood. There was scarcity of necessary goods in the market. The economic life of people was shattered because they were not having money with them, they were not having goods in the market, the prices were quite high, and they were struggling for their livelihood. All the nations of the world, they were into this particular economic depression. Everywhere there was a trouble. Each and every nation was facing this particular problem. This is economic effect that has brought changes, major changes in the world policies and economy. Next is communism in China. Many nations of the world were impressed by the way Russia had made a fast progress with its communist measure. a collectivism, right? So, with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, China was also impressed and Japan became weak because the two nuclear bombs was dropped on its two cities and Japan was completely ruined after the Second World War. And under these circumstances only, China it began to rise day by day. Taking advantage of this, Mao Zedong established communist rule in 1949 at the end of the revolution in China. Let us see the beginning of Cold War and long-term effects. After the World War II, the world was divided into two superpowers, that is America and Russia. During the war, both the nations they were friends, they fought together. But after the war, it is said, there was a difference of opinion between them and it went on increasing day by day. And as it increased day by day, the democratic America and communist Russia became mutually opposite groups. Other small nations of the world joined these two groups according to their convenience. The war of words and the war of ideologies that both superpowers initiated in order to support or oppose each other's opinion rendered the atmosphere of Cold War. Many times the situation of Cold War was seemed to be created because there was the war of words, there was the war of ideologies. They were not at all ready to agree with each other's opinion and that created the atmosphere of Cold War. Let us see about United Nations. This is the symbol of emblem of United Nations. At the end of the First World War, the League of Nations was formed in order to establish world peace. But the fact that the World War II occurred meant that the League of Nations was a failure, a very big failure, and we have seen why it failed. At the end of the World War II, that is on 24th October 1945, the United Nations was established with the purpose of peace, security and coexistence in the world. examine any matter related to international relations, it accepts the budget presented by the Secretary General every year and allocates the expenses. It attempts to find solutions to the economic problems of the nations, human rights, disarmament, and other international matters. So, this is how we can say that the United Nations General Assembly Hall. Here, the picture is given of General Assembly Hall, and it is undertaken by the member nations. So many things are written, certain points are given. What can they do? They can discuss on